It can guide your thoughts, bring us closer to the Father. Alleluia, 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 alleluia. Let us pray. O transfigured one, transform us by your grace. Through your word and sacrament, may we come to know you and to be more and more like you. We pray in your name. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. While visiting an old and spooky country house, a lady confided in the guide that she was terrified of ghosts and really dreaded meeting one on the tour. Well, to reassure her, the guide informed her that in all the years he had worked at the house, he had not once seen a ghost. "And how long have you worked here?" asked the woman. 300 years. Has anyone here ever seen a ghost? You don't have to raise your hands if you have, don't worry. I'm not sure what to make of tales of haunted houses, poltergeists, etc. But I do admit that I have a certain fascination with the possibility of the existence of what we might call supernatural entities. And yes, if you were to find me alone in my basement, sometimes watching TV, you might see me watching something like The X-Files or other kinds of shows that kind of tease the mind about the supernatural. And to be sure, at times there can be, I think, an unhealthy fascination with these kinds of things. But mostly I think I find these stories intriguing because I believe there is more to our reality than readily meets the eye. Certainly the world in which Jesus lived had that perspective. He certainly believed in the supernatural. Now, some call this perspective magical realism. And this is the belief that there are different levels of reality working at the same time. So we find this perhaps at play in stories that involve peoples and creatures of all kinds and presences that have this incredible way to figure, disfigure, unfigure, and perhaps even transfigure our realities. The Transfiguration story we just heard contains blazing elements of the fantastic. There's a lot going on here, and I think on many different levels. Jesus heads up to the mountain, an obvious clue that something dramatic is about to happen, perhaps something even Moses-like. And sure enough, the appearance of Jesus' face changes, and his clothes dazzle in the light of glory. And suddenly, two other figures appear, and they are identified as Moses and Elijah. Luke says they appeared in glory, and they formed this sort of dazzling trinity with Jesus. And they were conversing over events to come, namely Jesus' pending departure. And that word actually for his departure is the same word we translate as Exodus. And the three disciples, Peter, James, and John, though they're weary with sleep, they are awakened to this incredible experience and to witness this amazing event. Now Peter, who, God bless Peter, right? I mean, this is another story where he just said, God bless Peter. Apparently he wants this experience to continue. And so he suggests making dwellings, or another way of translating that is booths for the visitors. And even Luke cannot help but throw Peter kind of out there to the wolves and saying that Peter didn't know what he was talking about, didn't know what he was saying. And we might be tempted to sort of just chalk this up to Peter being impulsive once again and making rather silly suggestions. I think we should think for a few moments about what might be behind Peter's suggestion. Firstly, we should understand that Peter's idea of constructing a dwelling or a booth was one way the Jewish people commemorated the festival of booths or tabernacles. This was one of the major feasts, a very important one in the Jewish faith. This festival was about remembering the travails of the Hebrew people as they wandered in the desert, and they lived essentially in tents for a whole generation. One unique aspect to this feast was that the families were required to build makeshift shelters or booths to remind them that God delivered them out of the land of Egypt. So, was Peter thinking about this uniquely potent tradition when confronted with his faith's greatest heroes? Did he sense that God was doing or about to do something as wonderful as delivering his people from slavery? And he was simply searching for an appropriate way to honor this from the categories that he had to work with his limited understanding. You see, I think it's human nature to try to categorize the unique, even inexplicable experiences we have. When overwhelmed, we search our minds for possible explanations in order to make sense of what's happening. In our spiritual lives, our temptation might even be to try to capture the unique moments of grace we experience. In Peter's case, it appears as if he's ready to make shrines to mark the occasion. Physical dwellings to encase Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. He knows this is a wonderful moment, but he thinks he must try to hold on to it. Now, at that moment, a cloud descends over them, and the voice of God booms. "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." Now, the disciples didn't understand what was happening, but how fascinating that God makes the moment that much more mysterious and overwhelming. I'd imagine the appearance of Moses and Elijah solidified their sense of Jesus as a great prophet. But the voice of God declaring Jesus' sonship took the theophany, to this revelation of God, to a whole new level. At the moment, the disciples were looking to put Jesus into a box, or a tent in this case. God shows them even more than they could have asked for or imagined. Can we relate to this at all? Do we ever try to, I use the word domesticate God? That is, we try to understand God on our own terms. We want to make God very familiar and safe. Even to refer to God as a he, as we often do, it's a way we anthropomorphize God, trying to understand God as if God were limited to gender. When we pray as well, how often do we approach God with awed silence, recognizing we're in the presence of great mystery and the all-powerful creator of the world? Or if you're like me, a lot of the time I end up coming to God as kind of a holy Santa Claus who's always on call, waiting for my lists of demands and perhaps requests and wants and desires. Or perhaps we might be very cozy and comfortable with Jesus, our buddy, our friend, and maybe we speak to him like we would any other friend that we might have. Or perhaps we even think that there are really only a few ways in which we can experience God, and we're very comfortable in leaving them at that. We have our little ways of worship, our little ways of prayer, of reading our Bible, and that's as far as it goes. Now, the wonder of the Incarnation reveals to us that God has indeed come among us and has become accessible to us through the Spirit. We may approach God boldly, as St. Paul reminds us in our reading today. But that's not because God has toned down God's godness or holiness and glory. Jesus has revealed to us the new covenant, the law of love available to us through his life, death, and resurrection. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of new covenant that Paul gets at in our reading. Traditional church teaching has treated the new covenant as one that trumps the old covenant that we find in the Old Testament with all its laws and regulations, the Torah. And the idea is that Jesus brings the new covenant, which is the law of love, which can just simply be kind of broadly, universally applied, and we have kind of this basic understanding of it. But at least one of the early church fathers, Gregory of Nyssa, had a really fascinating way of speaking about the new covenant that might give us a little bit of a different perspective on it. He had the idea of eternal progress, that God was continually at work to transform us from glory, or from one degree of glory to another, from glory to glory, as our reading says today. Now, he wasn't speaking about us improving in our moral virtues so much, or about evolving per se, but that since God was infinite and beyond human calculation, then our quest to find God was never quite complete, or that is, that it was always deferred in a sense, because God was always more than we can reach for. Biblical writer David Fredrickson has a fascinating way of reflecting on this concept that I want to share with you today. He talks about the motif of face in today's reading, this image of the face. So Paul talks about how Moses had a veil over his face to protect the people from getting a sense of God's glory. But then the veil comes off. And Paul says that his audience, in fact, has had their veils removed, and that they could see one another face to face, and they could see God face to face. So does this mean then that they could be seen and known completely, because now this veil was gone? Fredrickson's answer is sort of a yes and a no. He speaks of the example of sitting down face to face with a friend over dinner. So let's try to use our imaginations to think about this. So we're sitting down across from a good friend, and upon close examination, one certainly gets to know the other better by reading the nonverbal expressiveness in the other's face. So as you're having a conversation, we all can kind of pick up on the little nuances in each other's faces. The eyebrow kind of, I'm known for a little bit of an eyebrow cock, apparently. Sometimes when things strike me, and I have one side of my mouth curls up and the other one goes down. And people that know me and kind of, Lauren in particular, will kind of point these things out to me. And to help try to read one another, right? And it goes vice versa. And so there's a sense in which that as we come to know one's nonverbal cues, particularly in the face, that we come to understand each other better. But there's another complexity to this interaction, isn't there? Because the thing is, if I react with an eyebrow cock, for example, that typically makes Lauren smile, because she thinks it's funny that I do that. Then I'm reacting to her reacting. So then she's reacting to my reacting to her reacting, and on and on and on and on it goes. Then what might also take place is I might, as I'm, gazing into her eyes, I see my reflection in her pupil. And so suddenly I'm not only reading her face, I'm reading my face within her face, reacting to her reaction. And it goes on and on and on ad infinitum. And so there's this sense in which we are getting to know each other more and more, but the more we get to know each other, the more we're not. Because there's more mystery. There's ever and ever more mystery. So every time we might think of our close relationships, every time we think we really know someone, how often do we get surprised? Because there's more to them than that. I used to tell young people all the time, the more I learn, the less I know. And I really believe that to be true. And especially in the spiritual life, when we think about wading into an ocean, the deeper we get, the more greater sense we have of how much we don't know, the vastness of that ocean. So Fredrickson is sort of talking about this when he talks about New Covenant. He says, so now you have two faces to read instead of one, hers and yours, and since she now sees herself in your pupils, her reading list has doubled. And so it goes ad infinitum. Your friendship has become a hall of mirrors. Gazing at your friend across the table has resulted in more mystery, not less. More desire to know her, but the growing realization that you never will. Looking upon a face promises an unending search in which meaning, presence, and immediacy will always, as long as you gaze face to face, be deferred. That is the new covenant. Always new. We're about to enter into a new season of Lent. I can't believe it's already here. It's very fast this year. Many of us have gone through years of Lenten journeys together. Might we be open to new ways of encountering God this Lent? Maybe we come to a service or an event that we haven't come to before. Maybe we try a spiritual discipline we haven't tried before. Maybe we come to our 5-week Lenten series here at the church on Wednesday evenings as a way of encountering God in a new way. We have to resist the temptation to hold on to the familiar, hold on to those experiences that we have, but see that there's always something new for us, and there's always new ways in which God wants to reveal God's self to us. And I read the second part of the story that seems like a completely other story. I know it wasn't printed in your bulletins. I kept going, but it actually is one of the options for this day. And it's chosen, I believe, because the Transfiguration story doesn't end on the mountain, but it actually ends out in the world, in the streets, off the mountain. It ends with a miracle, with a healing, with a compassionate experience of Christ healing a boy. And that story ends with, and all were amazed at the glory of God, power of God. The Transfiguration story is about the glory of God, but that glory doesn't stay on the mountain. It's revealed and experienced as we go out into the world, and we experience God through our acts of compassion and engagement with others. So let us be ever mindful of that, particularly as we journey into the season of Lent together. And I'm going to end with this line that Fredrickson has, based from today's reading. In 2 Corinthians, Paul pictures the church as a community of faces gazing at one another, lost in a hall of mirrors, in dizzying transfiguration into the image of Jesus, the Christ, the one who is to come, always deferred, from glory into glory. Amen.